Chapter 44, in which the big day has just arrived. Phineas Trout's boasting voice blares out from the cathedral radio in the Pratchett's living room.
How do you do, everyone? It seems the big day you've all been waiting for has finally come. We're greeting you now from the Cadona Fairground as we celebrate the city's bicentennial. Just 3 days ago, during her transatlantic voyage, the dirigible Providence was forced to endure a torrential rainstorm before being successfully moored onto a tender. Now, it's been repaired and is now in final preparation. For the next 2 hours, directly to your radios, we'll be giving you live coverage from the city fair at the seaside as the Zeppelin makes ready for her scheduled flight across the city. So, if you decide to participate in this momentous and soon-to-be historic occasion, the admission price for grown-ups is 5 sterlings, 3 sterlings for children. For those who are listening at home and choose not to go, be sure not to touch that dial or turn down your volume, even if you find me boring. I mean it. We'll be back with a word from our sponsor.
While a soap advert is being played, the 4 grandparents are lounging in their beds as Mrs. Pratchett delivered their breakfast in a tray before heading upstairs to her children's room. She dressed Audrey with a red bow on her head and her prettiest blue dress. After having a bath, Todd puts on clean underwear and wears his white shirt, brown pants, black jacket, and red tie. Mr. Pratchett, dressed in his beige suit, ate a late breakfast and decides to call Floyd on the phone.
Yes? Who is it?
"Hello, Floyd. It's me,"
Mr. Pratchett.
he said.
What do you want?
"I want to talk to your wife. It's urgent."
Why?
"Just listen. I've decided not to work today because I'll be going with my children to the fairground while my wife is making lunch
She's
for..."
not in the shop.
"What?"
I said she's not in the shop. She's already in the fairground.
"She's already in the fairground?"
And you don't need to worry about being late. We're closed.
"You're closed today?
Yes.
Then what are you doing?"
I'm just minding the shop while she's off.
"I see. Well, I'll be heading to the fairground immediately. Who knows, I might see her later."
Alright. Best of luck to you.
"Thank you. Glad we had this talk.
See you first thing tomorrow morning for work.
Bye."
Bye now.
As he hung up the phone, he calls out to his children. "Todd? Audrey? Are you two finished up there?" Todd cried. "Just about!" Then he and Audrey stormed down the stairs, while Mrs. Pratchett calls out, "Do be careful. You're not in a hurry." "Sorry, Mom," Todd said. "He's just excited about the dirigible as well as his sister," Grandpa Jack said, smiling. "That is no excuse," Mrs. Pratchett said. "They could have been hurt." "Well, children, it's time to go," Mrs. Pratchett said. The children ran out the front door, and Mrs. Pratchett kissed her husband on the cheek. "I'll see you in 4 hours," Mr. Pratchett said. Unexpectedly, Grandpa Jack spoke up. "Son, can I talk to you for a moment?" "What is it, Dad?" Mr. Pratchett asked. "Seeing that you're taking the grandchildren instead of me, I hope everything goes hunky-dory, eh?" "I'll send you a souvenir," Mr. Pratchett said. "Don't forget, you can still hear about the bicentennial on the radio," Grandpa Jack asked. "What good will that do?" "It's just that my mind is so obsessed with one girl."
"Oh, Jack,"
Grandma Eileen blushed.
"you don't have to say that. I know."
"Sorry, love," Grandpa Jack chuckled. "But it isn't you." Grandma Eileen's smile faded.
"Then who?"
Grandma Eliza asked.
"Tinkerbell? The Tooth Fairy?"
Grandpa David suggested. "Both of them are wrong," Grandpa Jack said. "It's none other than the manifestation of my grandchildren's overactive imagination. The lovely Princess Kitty, pretty as a chocolate glazed eclair." Mr. Pratchett was shocked. "Not this again," he thought.
"Is she the Tooth Fairy?"
Grandpa David asked. "Dad, I have no time for this," Mr. Pratchett said. "Why the rush?" Grandpa Jack asked. "You know that Zeppelin is not going anywhere without the grandchildren. This is what Kitty expects most of all. They had to share her with the others. They might have. Dad, after the fair in a few years, the children will have to grow up. It is for their own good.
Oh, really? The same as you after pretending to believe in her?
When Grandpa Jack saw Mr. Cratchit's shocked face, he laughed.
Oh, yes. You think you can hide from your children? For 3 weeks, you were caught in a trap with nowhere to run, because you don't believe in her.
Doesn't matter, Dad, Mr. Cratchit said. I had to, because I want to make them feel relieved after what happened at Malchance's.
If Kitty were here, she won't be happy to hear you say that,
Grandpa Jack finished, his voice becoming more and more excited.
Now, I'll give you one last chance to redeem yourself. Can you please let me take them to the fairground?
For God's sake, Dad, you can't even make it far. You haven't had the will.
That's what you think,
Grandpa Jack said.
I haven't felt going outside in 20 years. Until I met her, at least.
Stuff and nonsense,
Grandma Eliza said.
Really a network of nonsense.
Is it?
Grandpa Jack demanded. He threw his blanket off of himself and gets out of bed.
You won't even believe this if I tell you about what I've been through.
Dad, it would be best if you don't get all worked up, Mr. Cratchit said. You won't have that much left to live.
Poor fool,
Grandpa Jack laughed.
Your concerns of my health don't interest me. I've never felt so young, especially after the journey I've had with her just 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks?
When I headed out of the house, there I saw Todd, Audrey, and Kitty on board a cat bus, helmed by a cat with a grinning face and an old engineer. You see, we had an adventure.
Without us knowing? Mrs. Cratchit was shocked.
You let me finish first, Grandpa Jack said. There I was, in the totalitarian country of Bavaria, where having fun is a crime, and children become slaves.
Mrs. Cratchit cried again. How could you be so reckless with my children? Going to other places without letting me know. You could have been hurt or killed.
If Kitty doesn't save us and overthrow Bavaria, we'd be killed, Grandpa Jack said. Now let me finish. Now, as we were in Bavaria, the Baron is plotting to turn my grandchildren and the others into pigs, to be slaughtered into pork. Of course, they wouldn't be alive if Kitty and the cat bus did rescue them and overthrow the Baron. Well, I say he deserved what he got.
Mrs. Cratchit has had enough and said, John Harold Cratchit, you get right back to bed this instant. You need to calm down and let your son take your grandchildren. I'm only doing this because I care for you.
Well, why shouldn't I go if the grandchildren were once saved by Princess Kitty? He asked. I can assure you...
Suddenly, within seconds, he staggers, clutching at his chest while he groaned loudly. Then he dropped like a stone to the floor. Grandma Eileen screamed and is about to get out of bed, but Mr. Cratchit stopped her.
No, Mother, he said.
I'll get him up.
Love, call an ambulance.
But as soon as he placed his hands on the old man's shoulder, he suddenly gets back up and places his hand on his collar. Mr. Cratchit recoils as everyone screamed in fright, but Grandpa Jack begins to cackle like a hyena.
Jack! What has gotten into you?
Grandma Eileen scolded.
Do you want me to die of a heart attack?
I wouldn't even be surprised if any of you old farts die of a heart attack, Grandpa Jack said. I was busy having so much fun.
That's it!
Grandpa David shouted.
Come over here so I can knock your lights out!
Oh, please, Grandpa Jack scoffed. You know better not to be grouchy. See, Mr. Cratchit? You can see that I'm well enough to take Todd and Audrey to the fairground, dressed in my finest clothes that I haven't worn since I was in my glory days. But you can still attend to believe in Kitty. You do want to see her after waiting for 3 weeks, don't you? I'm now giving you this opportunity.
Up until this point, there isn't a single sane person in this room who knows when it is time for the children to grow up. Mr. Pratchett said. I know that it's for their own good. Then Todd and Audrey came back into the living room. It's not, Dad, Todd said. Son, please, Mr. Pratchett said. I really want to truly believe in her, but you know I can't. You understand? Are you coming with us? Todd asked. No. I've decided not to. Besides, someone had to look after the grandparents like your mother. We understand perfectly. You may or may not recall that proverb. Those who don't believe get what they deserve. And right now, that includes you. The heart of a child from within is what makes them believe. For a grown-up, sometimes, he has no time for anything. But that's how society works nowadays, does it? At least let me say goodbye for a while. Mr. Pratchett moved closer to hug his children, but they pushed him back, now turning against him. You're no different from the rest of the people, because you don't actually believe in her, Todd said. If you think she doesn't exist, then you're wrong. Everyone is wrong. She has a voice that deserves to be heard by everyone. We will make her presence known by the time we set foot inside the dirigible. That's right, Grandpa Jack said. I'll even shop at nothing to make sure they are, while I remain invisible in the crowd. Dad, Mr. Pratchett said, there's nothing more to say about the matter. Now, if you wouldn't mind, the grandchildren and I shall prepare for destiny. Grandpa Jack said to our daughter-in-law, Find my clothes, and see if they fit me. She said to her husband, Love, we'll discuss this later. In a few moments, as soon as Grandpa Jack returned from the living room, he seemed unrecognizable without his nightshirt. He's now dressed in a brown coat, white shirt, blue ascot, matching pants, and black shoes. Then he takes the grandchildren outside and into the family car. From now on, nothing else matters, except that by the time the grandchildren arrive at the fairground, they're going straight to the Providence. But destined as they are not prepared for what shall await them from the storm. I've known and read about these sorts of creatures in folklore when I was visiting the shrines of Japan. But never until this day have I actually find myself meeting one in person. Satoru Takahata spoke when he saw the Tanuki gang on the front of Reynard Manor.
We can appreciate the adulation and praise from likes of you, but we do not have the time for that,
Takashi said, crossing his arms.
Honestly, Takashi,
Daichi said,
whoever thought we'd see the day when good old Queenie suddenly had the tits to ally with a human being in helping this girl feel welcome to this city?
He asked, laughing while his eyes bore into Takahata's.
The others are going to have a field day when they hear that.
Regardless of what I am, I wish it, Takahata said. I never wanted anything but to be loyal to Shineko, your cat queen. Daichi's face remained poker-faced.
Makes you wonder a lot, don't you? He said. Have you got any idea of what to expect if you're with her?
A lot of things. I've already heard of what a Bakineko like her can do to those who has encountered it. I know what she's like, and I fear that she'll be more agitated than ever, now that the day of the bicentennial has finally come.
Not as agitated as she is going to be if this girl didn't show up at the fairground, Mistress Kaku said. We have pledged our allegiance to our queen. What you should know is that her calmness is far more terrifying and threatening than her anger alone.
I've noticed, Takahata said. I was with her last night, when I was brushing her fur. Her calmness isn't the only terrifying thing. What is? Gonta said. Her deep seduction, just by the cadence of her voice. Takahata said. As I became entranced, I'm starting to have feelings for her. Urges. She's not like my Yasuko-san who cared towards me when I was terminated from the council. She was like any other woman from Japan that I've known, whether they're spending time in the rice fields or the forest. To Shineko, if I'm not loyal to begin with, she'll only see me as prey, and herself a predator. I'm like everybody else in Kadono. Well, that makes you the luckiest man alive, Daichi chuckled.
Why must we stand around and talk when we're supposed to go to the fairground?
Takashi asked. You are impatient, Takashi, Gonta said. There'll be plenty of time before we leave, right after we get acquainted with this human who will be joining us. Oh, and who said you three are coming with us? You tell me, why shouldn't we go? Daichi asked. There's only 11 of us. Hayashi and Sasuke are in Kanagawa, Kumatora and Tomasaburo won't last an hour without roughhousing, and let's not forget Saizoman's still stone drunk. The storm is already surrounding Kadono, Ryotaro said. And when it strikes, and if the Princess Key is not in the fairground, this day will no longer be like any other day. The storm shall be controlled by the three of you.
Oh, crumbs!
Takashi said.
I don't know if we could right here in this city, Ryutaro. Every time we cause a disaster, it is unintentional.
Then just this once, make the disaster in the city intentional. Ryotaro sneered. Make what happened at Kanto Plains in 23 look like a social gathering. Show no hesitation unless you want to answer to the Queen. You all swore your allegiance.
Just as long as no one in Kadono gets killed from it,
Mistress Kaku said.
We just wanted to make them listen. Have the lot scared, you mean? Daichi exclaimed. No need to tell us twice. We caused trouble either way. Let us be gone, and we shall wait for your word to strike! Bye.
Then the three marched off towards their battered four-seater. How I've wanted to get acquainted with the Tanuki, Takahata said. I've learned so much about them. To my people, your kind was commonly associated with the Japanese raccoon dog. You are reputed to be mischievous and jolly, masters of disguise and transforming into either a human or an object, and can sometimes possess human beings like puppets. But you are somewhat gullible and absent-minded. Aside from your powerful ability to transform, perhaps the most famous attribute that you've possessed are the massive, malleable testicles between your legs, which they can adapt to any need. They can be used as weapons, drums, fans to keep cool, fishing nets, even umbrellas. Often, Tanuki incorporate their testicles into their disguises. For example, the Tanuki becomes a shopkeeper, and its testicles transform into the shop. Or perhaps a palanquin, complete with servants to cart the Tanuki from place to place. Your kind is also said to drum on your large bellies, making sounds such as pom poko or pon pon. Therefore you may or may not be the cause of mysterious drumming sounds, which was called Tanuki Bayashi. He took a moment to compose himself, before continuing. Now that you're all here, you can say that it is my privilege to meet you. And the pleasure is all ours, Gonta said, smirking. However, it may be just a bit fluky for a human to hang out with the likes of us, as in standing out. Takahata said. Does that make me wonder if I can be like one of you? Boy, do you have the best of luck. You see, upon death, you only have two options. You either continue to live as a yokai, or do you wish to be in a void where it's dark and silent, while your body's food to the worms. You could say it's our way of the afterlife. Quite a low price to pay in order to live forever. We're already dead. Yet we continue to walk among the living, whilst we always disguise ourselves or anything we do in our power to fool said living. That's not all we do, Mrs. Kaku said, holding up a stack of banknotes. Although it's called cheating in order to make a living, instead of making money from working at a job, we turn ordinary leaves into banknotes and acorns into coins. So for this occasion, I think we can make an exception in fooling the ticket man with these. Bear that in mind, that they're more delicate than the real thing if we don't take care of them properly. Mismanagement such as this would give the game away.
I understand completely,
Takahata said.
Everything you do is willing to fool mankind single-handedly.
Inari walks out of the front door, carrying a cylindrical box, which he gives to Ryotaro. Mistress Kaku calls out to the other Tanuki. Everyone, gather round. The kitsune would like to make an announcement regarding the city's celebration. At an instant, the Tanuki, including Takahata, all turn their attention towards Ryotaro.
I'm sure you all have met Mr. Satoru Takahata, formerly a member of the city council, he said. His termination only resulted in him wrapped around the queen's finger. I was there in Apujo when it occurred, and she did it with what's inside this.
He points to the box he was holding.
Mayor Donovan would think that I and our queen will be arrested upon arriving at the fairground. He can only enjoy his triumph while he can, because given what he had said to the one, the Princess Kitty, nobody in Kadona will be prepared for the nightmare to come. Which is why, while we're at the fairground, we shall only look for the girl to see if she shows up, instead of riding the Ferris wheel, or shoot ducks with air rifles, or knock down milk bottles. May our resentment towards the incredulity of humanity be the seed of disaster, and all seeds must grow. And when it does grow, if the Princess Kitty does not show up at the fairground, then the people of Kadona will remember this day. But they will only remember how terrifying the consequences were for wanting the girl gone, when all is plunged into chaos and everyone in a panic. Come a year, 10 years, there won't be anyone who can ever be recovered from the terror that has happened on the 9th of June.
He then ordered,
"Leaves on heads. Head to your cars."
As soon as the Tanuki put leaves on their heads, turning them human, they rushed to their motor cars with hand-crank engines. Ryotaro hands the box to Takahata.
"You're with me, Gonta and Fireball."
As soon as Takahata walks with Ryotaro, Gunter Hawkins, and Mabel Pearson, while staring at the old motor cars that were parked at the gates, he can't help but call out to the Tanuki.
"Why drive to the fairground in those old cars? Why not use the modern ones with electric engines?"
We're not familiar with the technological advantages in modern times, Herman said, while starting up his Jelani Belleville with Hanako, Okio, and Koharu in the back seat. We're simply willing to live in some simpler time. The Edo period is long gone, so we have to make the most in living in a period we've adapted to.
Like the turn of the century, and before the war,
Takahata realized. Exactly, Herman said. Every time we do that, we'll stand out among the crowd with their flannel shirts and their starched collars. Ryotaro opens the car door for Takahata to allow him to sit in the back seat. Ryotaro sat next to him, and closed the door. If Donovan thinks that he can shut both I and the Queen out from the fairground, he's bound to be disappointed. And what's inside the box you're holding will make sure of it, Ryotaro said. Another human wrapped around her finger, Takahata said. Another puppet. Indeed, Ryotaro said. That's what he thought of what the Cat Queen has said to him. What baffles me the most is that these people will simply never understand the true nature of the unknown, derived from classic folklore. When will they accept the fact that reckless actions have consequences? Very soon, he thought to himself. By then, it will be too late if we're unsuccessful in finding the Princess Kitty at the